Charlemagne, king of the Franks. Who was Charlemagne? What would he accomplish and what would distinguish him as a leader during his reign and during his lifetime? In this audio episode we will explore Charlemagne, taking a look at the leader and his exploits. As we dive deeper, we will take the time to look at several aspects of his life and the impact that he would have. From his early days, to the impacts events in his childhood would have. We will also explore his parentage, siblings and family, as well as some of his education and the impact it would have on his later years, if any. We will in addition take a look at the events that would occur in his youth, up to the point in time that he would ascend the throne along with Charlemagne and how events would unfold following this period. In addition to this, we will also take a look at the death of Pepin and some of the things that would occur in its wake. Charlemagne would have a large impact on the domain that he would come to rule, making massive changes and making an impact on the lives of those who resided in the domain. We will take a look at some of the events that would occur during his reign as well as some of the battles, some of the strategies used, the individuals involved, as well as the outcomes of the battles as we explore more on the topic of Charlemagne. Thank you for listening to this podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Charlemagne was king of the Franks, a title that he would occupy for several decades during which many events would occur, in both his life and in the history of the kingdom. In this role, he would be succeeded by Louis the Pious. He would also have other titles, amongst them would be the title of King of the Lombards and the Emperor of the Carolingian Empire. In the former he would spend decades in the role, like he had in the role of the King of the Franks, and would be able to impact changes and oversee several events. Under his reign, several important and crucial changes would occur that would change the European landscape for decades and centuries after, setting the tone for events that would follow long after his death, and determining the future and fate of many people that would follow. In this audio podcast, we explore the story behind the man, and explore aspects of his personal life, his motivations, the changes he would implement, and the extents of his legacy. We start with who Charlemagne would represent. He'd be a child of Pepin the Short and Bertrand of Laon, and would play a role in major changes in the European continent during the Middle Ages, a period that would see battle after battle fought and would also see several key developments and changes. Looking at a timeline of events, 687 would see the eventful, momentous and impactful Battle of Tertry, which had involved significant individuals the likes of Pepin of Herstal and Bertrand, and would occur in Somme. Events had occurred in 681 that would have some bearing on those that would unfold here, and those had involved Pepin II and Waradin, and had seen a conflict that had involved the two come to peace. The conflict that would occur in 687 in Somme, and that would go on to have somewhat of an impact on the events surrounding it, would involve Austrasia and Neustria. Pepin was the mayor of the Palace of Austrasia and Berkel was the counterpart for Neustrasia. The events that would occur during the battle and their outcomes would have a bearing on the power of several individuals as well as some territorial consequences. King Theuderic III would also be involved. The Austrasians and Pepin would emerge from the battle with the victory over the Neustrians and Berchar. The event would have important consequences for the future of both powers, seeing a swing in the power dynamic between the two, and also setting the tone for changes that would occur later on in history and would involve the Merovingians, and somewhat of their decline in power. A deeper look into the Battle of Tertry. Battle of Tertry. The Battle of Tertry occurred in 687 and would have political aftereffects. It would see the involvement of Berchar and Pepin of Herstal. Present as well would be forces of Austrasia and forces of Neustria and Burgundy. Some of the ramifications would surround Berchar and would see Berchar lose power. They would also see another rise in the form of Nordebert. Some of the ramifications of the battle, however, would be felt at a later date and would not necessarily be felt then and there. The fate of the Neustratians would be affected in some way following the battle, and events that had occurred and the outcomes of the battles would find themselves affecting numerous people in numerous ways. After the conflicts, Pepin would carry on undertaking other actions that would further cement his power. The death of Pepin would occur sometime in 714, and in his place as Duke and Prince of the Franks would be his son Charles Martel, who would continue to have an eventful life filled with many changes. King Theuderic IV dies in 737. 741 would see the death of Charles Martel, son of Pepin, which put an end to a life that had been eventful and impactful and had started all the way back in 688. It had seen many changes that would reverberate for many more years after. Charlemagne I and Pepin the Short take over in 741 and start their own story of their reigns. They give to Childeric III the kingship of the Franks in 743, but his rule would end in a way that would see him removed from the throne and the kingship being taken by Pepin, years after the death of Charles Martel and the placement of Theuderic III to the throne. The move would occur sometime around 751 or 752, and accentuated the life of Pepin, which had started in 714. In this role of king of the Franks he would be succeeded by Charlemagne. Political moves would be undertaken by Pepin to increase his power. 748 saw the placement of Duke Tassilo as leader in Bavaria. He would be relevant to several events in the future. His father was Duke Odilo of Bavaria and his mother was a daughter of Charles Martel by the name of Hitrude. He would be accused at one point in time of being involved in events that would see the city of Bolzano attacked, and this would not be the only time that he would come to be accused of similar actions. Pepin has a son called Charlemagne in 748. Charlemagne probably spends some of his time as a youth in Pepin's court where he is educated. 754. Possible anointment of Pepin as king by Pope Stephen II. A general period would occur that would see Pepin involved in a campaign against Aquitaine. Aquitaine would be associated with individuals the likes of Duke Hunald and the likes of Wildfar, who would be the Duke of Aquitaine over some period of time. Events during this period, and around the year 761 would see Charlemagne join Pepin in this campaign, which would be significant for some of the events that would occur during it and in the general period. For one, the year 768 would see the death of Pepin, the son of Charles Martel, and father of Charlemagne and Carloman, the leader who had made several impacts and had been involved in several events during his life. Charlemagne and Carloman ascend the thrones and positions that were left by their father. A coronation occurs for the two brothers, but separately. Two locations would have some significance in these events. The locations would be Nguyen and Soissons, and the event would occur sometime during the year 768, which to some extent represented somewhat of what would follow. Charlemagne would rule places like Austrasia and Caraman, was given Alemannia and other regions. Aquitaine remained an issue, as it had for their father before them. The momentous campaign against Aquitaine would see several events occur during it. It would see them march together, but by the end of the battle, things would change. At some point in time, Duke Hunald would be caught by Charlemagne, which would be a significant event. Events that would occur would lead to rising tensions between the two brothers. Pope Stephen III is made the Bishop of Rome. Several events would occur during this period in time and during his life. His time would begin around the year 768 AD. The brothers would be influential and would play a role in some of the affairs that concerned Pope Stephen III, as we will see somewhat later. Marriage between Desiderius' daughter and Charlemagne. Desiderius was the Lombard king. Their marriage would be broken in the future after Carloman's death, and when the widow of Carloman fled to Desiderius' courts. The marriage would have some political objectives. It had occurred sometime around 770 and would be annulled in the future. Son of Charlemagne, Pepin is born in 769 or 768. His mother is Hermotrude. He would continue to be involved in several events throughout his life. 771 would see the death of Carloman. The year 771 would also see Charlemagne become sole ruler, as king of the Franks, as well as a marriage between Charlemagne and Hildegard. From it several children would be born, amongst them Charles the Younger, Pepin of Italy, Gertrude, Louis the Pious and several others. Campaigns that would occur in the general period would include war against the Saxons, which would last for a while. Charles, son of Charlemagne, is born in 772 AD. He would live to around 811. He would occupy several roles and undertake several actions during the extent of his life, but he would die before his father. 772 would also see the death of Pope Stephen III, who had been involved in several events to do with the kingdom. He would be succeeded in his role by Pope Adrian I. Issues would arise concerning some territory and land, and previous events that had occurred in the past had seen some of the land that was in the possession of the papacy become captured by Desiderius, who was king of the Lombards. The desire of Pope Adrian I for these lands back would set in motion some events that would find Desiderius and Charlemagne on a course of collision. One that would eventually involve troops, who found themselves making their way across the difficult Alps. Other events that would occur prior to the movement of troops had included some attempts at diplomacy. 773 saw the siege on Pavia. Pavia was the capital in Lombard. The siege of Pavia 773 to 774. The siege of Pavia would see conflicts between the Franks and Lombards and the involvement of several prominent individuals. It would occur sometime around 773, lasting months until around 774. It would see fierce fighting between forces. Desiderius, who was king of the Lombards, would be involved along with Charlemagne. It would occur amidst tensions between the Lombards and the Franks, and would occur after the death of Carloman, co-ruler of Charlemagne. Some of the events that would occur would affect and involve his family. Several events would follow which would eventually see Desiderius in Pavia and his son, Adelchis, fleeing to Constantinople. Several other events would eventually see the surrender of the city, the capture of Carloman's family, and an attack on Verona which had influenced Adelchis' son's flight towards Constantinople. Within the city, famine would also develop, which would have an impact on events. Several events would occur following this. The year would also see a force to Verona to capture the city. Adalgis, a son of Desiderius, is able to escape. He would be important in the future, playing a role in a plot to undo the power of the Franks, but dies before some of the events would have occurred. Charlemagne celebrates Easter in April 774 in Rome, in the wake of the several important events that had occurred and had included events like the siege that had taken part in Pavia, the fleeing of Adalgis, and several other events. During this general period as well, Charlemagne would come to meet with Pope Adrian I, and several events would occur during this period as well. Whilst this occurred, some other events would still occur in the background. Pavia surrenders June 774. Some of the events that would occur in its wake include changes in power. Some aspects of it would be quite novel, and would see some transfer of power. Amongst some of the changes would see Desiderius is removed from throne, and Charlemagne ascends. The Franks are able to counter-raid, continuing the conflict between Charlemagne and the Saxons, which had seen some actions earlier on in the reign of Charlemagne. At some point in time there would be a rebellion by Duke Harajad of Friuli. Northern Italy in 774 would see the Lombards removed from power. 775 would see the birth of Gertrude, daughter of Charlemagne. She would be a daughter of Charlemagne and Hildegard. Her siblings would include the likes of Louis the Pious, Pepin of Italy, and Bertha. 776 would see a campaign against the Saxons that would yield numerous different outcomes. Some of the outcomes of these campaigns would include changes in land and in the status of some captives. Other events would follow in the years that would come. Some would concern the Saxons and would see Charlemagne's rule accepted by many of them. The 777 assembly at Paderborn would be an example. Several individuals would be present at the assembly, and other events outside of the Saxon wars would have some level of relevance to affairs there. 778 would see the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass. A deeper look into it. Battle of Roncesvalles Pass 778. A mountain pass would be the site of an ambush against some of Charlemagne's forces, which would occur in 778. Several events would occur following Charlemagne and his army start on their journey towards France. Charlemagne and his army would be followed by the Basques as they left the region and made for France, and the army's rear would be attacked. Several prominent individuals would be there, and would see action during the events that would follow. The move would be somewhat unexpected, and the Basques would be able to cause damage to Charlemagne's forces despite some apparent disadvantages on their side. Which isn't to say they had no advantages. Many casualties would be endured by Charlemagne's army, seeing several troops fall in the fighting, but parts of Charlemagne's army would still be able to escape. Lost to the army as well was some baggage along with some of their resources. The events had occurred along a mountain pass and had followed several key events like the invasion of the Iberian Peninsula, which had seen many events and characters involved over their course, as well as the destruction of the Pamplona city walls. Several prominent losses would occur during the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass. The end result was a Basque triumph, and numerous casualties and material losses for Charlemagne and his forces. Some of the individuals present would go on to achieve some acclaim. Some of the events that had occurred in the period surrounding it had involved individuals the likes of Thalaba ibn Obaid and the Umayyad emir of Córdoba. Prior to the battle, Charlemagne would have done at least two things. One involved the appointment of several individuals into some positions, and the other would involve the establishment of several counties. Charlemagne had also been involved in activities across Spain, entering places like Barcelona and Girona. Events would also see a siege of Saragossa occur. Charlemagne would then undertake actions that would help to aid his position within the region. Other events that would find themselves occurring in the same year as the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass would be the birth of Louis and Lothair, twin sons of Charlemagne. Several other events would happen, and some of them would involve Saxony. Some Saxon raids would take place sometime in this period and would see Saxony have an army sent out to it by Charlemagne. All these events would happen whilst other events were occurring. Birth of Bertha, daughter of Charlemagne, in 780. She shared in the parentage of several of her other siblings. At some point in time several events would occur in the life of Charlemagne which would see him renamed, baptized and anointed. Pepin would be another name he would come to be called by, a name that had previously had other notable individuals associated with it. General period would see some changes in some positions and in the lives of some of the children of Charlemagne. Crowning of Pepin and Louis, they are supported by regents as well as advisors in their respective domains which they are given. Pepin is king of the Lombards, Louis king of Aquitaine. They would go on to participate in the history of the future. General period would also see the betrothal of Gertrude, daughter of Charlemagne, to Emperor Constantine VI, which would be broken sometime in the future. The cause could be speculated to be due to some events that occurred when his mother, Empress Irene, failed to call Charlemagne to the Second Council of Nicaea would take place in the year 787, and would see several developments come from it. Gisela, daughter of Charlemagne, is born 782 AD. Death of Hildegard would occur in the year 783. The woman who had been by Charlemagne's side for a long period and would be the mother of several notable individuals, playing a role in several events during that time. Several other deaths would occur in the period after, including that of Charlemagne's mother, Bertrada, which would also occur in the year 783. Several events would occur that would concern the Saxons in some way or the other. Events like those in Thuringia in 784 would occur, as well as the issuance of the Capitulation de Partibus Saxoniae. Other events would also occur in the year 785, which would be particularly important for the Saxon Wars. Some events take place in the Duchy of Benevento, as it would at one point in time see the presence of Charlemagne, as he marched into it around the general period. Duke Arichis would also find himself surrendering. The general period would also see a meeting or meetings between Charlemagne and Constantine envoys. Events surrounding Bavaria and Duke Tassilo would at some point in time see the latter surrender to Charlemagne. Bavaria is eventually annexed into the kingdom, and there are conflicts against the Avars at several points in time. Amongst changes in the legitimacy of Charlemagne's relationship with Gertrude, his son Pepin loses his land and becomes involved in a plot against Charlemagne. However, the plot is thwarted. Several fallouts would come as a result of the plot, and numerous of those involved would have their fate sealed. Council in Frankfurt in 794. Several changes occur, including monetary changes and developments in ecclesiastical issues. A concord established, which would occur amidst other events and would not be an isolated occurrence, and that some other events would lead to it. Some building would also occur. Conflicts against the Avars by Pepin of Italy, which would have some consequences for both parties. 786 would see an event that would lead to several changes. Formal peace would be achieved between Charlemagne and the king of Mercia, Offa. This would have an impact on several other people. Pope Leo III and Charlemagne meet each other in September 799, amidst several other events that had occurred in the year, which had concerned Leo, including an attack on him. 800. Pope Leo and Charlemagne meet again after several events take place in the life of the former. 801. Barcelona is captured. The event would be part of several other events that had occurred and would involve the Carolingian Empire and the Emirate of Córdoba, seeing the involvement of several individuals the likes of Louis the Pious. 802. Capitulare Massorum Generale. It had content in it that would impact several aspects of life for numerous individuals. General period would also see a change in power occur in Byzantium, and this would have some impact on future events. Irene is removed from power. Nikephoros I ascends. He is opposed to Charlemagne, and conflicts arise between the two empires. Some of Charlemagne's lands are raided by Danes around the same time that several other events are occurring. The period would just be around the start of the 9th century. We will end the first part of the episode here. In the next episode we will continue with the story of Charlemagne and explore some more events that would occur during his reign.